James contacted me on Twitter to talking here, I went to the site and it had a few blog posts. One of the blog posts was cloud usage in EU countries, and Finland was on top. So I thought that, okay, I could try and figure out why that might be and talk a little bit about that. I am CTO of Nordcloud. It's a leading cloud integrator in Nordics. We help customers to run stuff in Amazon and then DevOps and this kind of stuff on the way. And so I talked to a lot of people who are going to the cloud or are in the cloud. And the thing that I came up with is that it's this idea of craft that we talked about yesterday a lot, like knitting, small-scale brewing, all this stuff, that is one of the kind of Nordic traits that leads to a cloud adoption. And that will be the argument anyway. In terms of like what craftsmanship is I think ownership is a one key element of that. So ownership of your project, like you're knitting, you're doing beer. Basically, it's about having something in a scale small enough that you are able to control it. And the flip side of that is dependency minimization, which is something that you find in a lot of organizations, and a lot of people strive for that. So if you are doing something that's measured on schedule, you want to kind of control the schedule yourself, such as an R&D organization. And maybe you just want to have a different type of sweater than is commercially available. And finally, there's the kind of mastery piece, which is you know, doing what you love and learning while you're doing it. So, cloud makes this kind of IT-style infrastructure projects that the eucalyptus guys talked about, it makes them craft. If you ever work in a large IT organization, there is a fair amount of bureaucracy and fair amount of people you have to talk to in order to get anything done. And it's especially frustrating for developers and a lot of the customers of IT. And clouds like Amazon and Azure and Google, they create a new abstraction level for deployments that one person can do a lot more on their own than they were historically able to. So when I send a cloud architect out to customer, that cloud architect does budget, deployment planning, deployment architecture, automation, networking, storage, everything. As a result, he is a happier employee than he would be in a shall I say, more traditional IT machine that has these kind of specialist skills. So that is a very positive thing. Effectively, it's moving the guys who are doing this work up the Maslow stack. So, few facts. Cloud adoption by a company. Over half of the companies in Finland are using cloud. So that is the kind of the, shall I say, the initial premise of this presentation. I think that does cover SaaS. It's probably too difficult to read, but the Sweden and Denmark are there like a third and fourth, so it's very kind of Nordic thing. We discussed yesterday about the open source projects that were started in Finland. There's a few. And now, with the view that this should be meta, I'm trying to kind of give a snapshot of a cultural thing in Finland that might explain some of it. So, like many IT stories, this one starts at the World War II. After the World War II, we worked with Soviet Union and came second, and as a result, we had to find housing and new livelihood for about 10% of the population. They literally packed their stuff, all that they could carry, and drove off to the, shall I say, west. And if you know the Finnish climate, and this is something that should be fixed relatively quickly. So it was a quite big problem to figure out how to go about this. The solution was open source. So that is a picture of an open source house design. It's made for a house near the village I live in. I haven't been able to locate it. There's quite a few of them in there. So basically, architects worked free and figured out a way to do a simple house that anybody could build. Historically, housing in Finland had been, made from logs and requires some craftsmanship to be able to actually build such house. This house, they designed to be made from timber, about 8 meters by 8 meters. There's a wooden stove thing in the middle going from bottom to up. And when you have a design like that, anybody can build it. You don't really have to have more than the basic skills and you're done. It's also quite easy to modify if you have need a different room layout than the typical square that they has it. So this is a kind of veterans house, and they were built in a massive scale after the war. Now, it's not enough to have just a kind of design. So then there's another concept that we have kind of covered a little bit, but I will cover a little bit more, which is talko. I'm not sure if it actually translates, but it's a concept where basically, if I ask you to come to paint my house, which I ask my friends and family, it's socially very difficult. If I say it's talko, it's very difficult for you to say no. You have to have a reasonably good explanation why, and if you had come and helped me, and then you asked me, then it would be near impossible for me to say no. I'd have to start making arrangements to be able to do it. And this is how these houses were built. So that's a picture of an actual talko. The host provides, food and drink, but after that everybody expects to work unpaid. 1 day, 2 days, few days. And a lot of these houses that were built after the war were actually built on a talko basis. Now, this is of course a bit like a GPL without lawyers. So it's a very kind of open sourcey thing. So I help you, you help me in return when time comes. And I think that this spirit is probably the main reason explaining open source prevalence in Finland. Difficult to prove, of course. Okay, so few things. It's just not the, shall I say, the talko spirit and whatnot, but it has to be said that the DIY and craft is very strong today in Finland, and actually in the Nordics as a whole, as we have seen here, with a lot of the, shall I say, examples of the craft. And that has quite a lot to do with the cloud adoption. I'll argue later. But now I will make a little bit of a digression. No cloud talk would be complete without talking about Docker. So the kind of question is that why is Docker so hot at the moment? And it has to do something to do with the craft actually. So Docker is a kind of container solution that brings in a file system and a Linux container together in a version control thing. And in many companies, this was already a solved problem a long time ago. People were launching containers with configuration management and everything worked. But Docker became very hot. And I think it is because these configuration management tools, Puppet, Chef, CF Engine and all this stuff, they had a wrong abstraction layer for developers. So when you use those systems, we brought them in, and then as a developer, rather than just handing some code, you would actually have something that configures it. What happened was that as a developer, you had to learn new stuff and you had to learn about systems management. And this is, for some developers, something that you didn't want to learn. So the abstraction layer was wrong. And this created like an anti-craft situation for developers. So you are no longer, you have dependencies, you are no longer in ownership situation. It's a little bit like moving down the Maslow stack again for you. And therefore, the question was that could I have, full configuration management so that all my systems have the bits in a place like they should be? As a developer, would I be able to choose anything I like in any environment and still have that? Have my test build pipelines, my testing environments all equal, and still not having to do any DevOps? That would be great. And of course, this is the promise of Docker. So I think that part of the excitement, especially in the developer community, about Docker is it enables them to return to craft mode and not to do too much of things that they don't care about that much. Right, so culture management. This is the part where now there should be a disclaimer that we have already had many times here. So we are entering a realm of stereotyping. So it should be taken with a kind of pinch of salt and understood that we are talking about stereotypes. Now, how do you manage craftsmen? When you go to an IT organization and you basically take an existing management structure that is good dealing with number of people, and you have a few individuals who do their work, the coordination problem becomes a little bit different. Also, the type of employees that enjoy that type of environment, it might be a little bit different. So, how do you manage this stuff? And now let's come to stereotypes. I think that we have covered a lot of these things already many times during these presentations, a little bit more explicit here. So, line management. You can either have this kind of delegated model where you are not, affecting the results count, or micromanagement model where the boss works on every detail. And the Nordic way is more on the left-hand side on the continuum. You can have a low organizational hierarchy or high one. In terms of variance in labor quality, so this does not say whether the labor is good or bad, but the variance. So the Scandinavian education system, and the Finnish in particular, what those PISA results mean actually is that the overall there is a the average quality that comes is quite good, and there's very little variance on it, so that there's fewer employees or fewer people from school that have quote-unquote bad skills. And as a manager of technical people, this is the kind of thing that you need in order to have the things that you have on your board, so that if you don't have micromanaged organization that is flat, then you better have like a workforce that can handle that sort of situation. Then management culture, whether you are kind of technology driven or whether you are finance driven, it is a little bit relevant also in cloud adoption, and whether you are working in an agile way or the agile way. And this is a really, shall I say, you should understood like anybody is in somewhere in a kind of continuum of this kind of this stereotyping. But the argument is that the reason why there is quite a lot of cloud adoption in Finland is that the management concepts on the left-hand side work really well with public clouds. And people immediately as they introduce cloud into a company, they see this and they like it. They move up the Maslow stack and then they push it out more and more, and you get like a positive snowball. That's the argument. Thanks.
Wow, there's a man that is not afraid to look for the root cause. Again, my head's exploding a bit. So yeah, we're in an interesting position. One of my suppliers has not turned up. We've heard a bit about resilience and being reactive. The benefits of redundancy.